A special edition of the Jeff Cameron Show, one that features an undefeated Florida State University football team. Regular season in the books. Good night, Irene, regular season. Good night, Florida. One team moves on, plays more football. The other gets to sit back and analyze a 5-7 campaign. Meanwhile, Florida State readies themselves for the ACC championship, now 12-0. And, you know, we say this a lot at the start of the season. We can go through the hows and whys and what we think will happen, but the objective is, of course, to win the game. And the Noles have not lost one. They have not lost a game in over a year. Well, that is something to behold. They have not lost a game in over a year, October of 2022. Winners of 18 straight football games now for Florida State as they head to the ACC championship game. And, of course, they don't all look so pretty now, do they? But they all in the same way, a way in which Florida State is on top. And I think that this team, at the very least, deserves the doff of the cap for grit, for toughness, for overcoming a lot. Now, I will say that we get into these debates about what this Florida State team is, and I think getting lost in that is a mistake because it's okay. Everybody's got an opinion about who they think are the 4 best teams, 5 best, 10 best, 20 best. We all have our thoughts on who would win, what game win, where, why, how it would happen, neutral field, at home, on the road, doesn't matter. Florida State has won 18 straight of these. They are undefeated. They are bringing in a top 4 class currently, probably going to do better than that. It's not over yet. They own the state yet again. That is back-to-back years of doing that. And they continue to find ways. It is a tough team both physically and mentally, and they've had to overcome a lot in both those areas. You think about, at this point of the season, where Florida State is at, and you realize that when we started the year, I think if I had told you that in some of the biggest games of the season, you wouldn't have either one of your starting offensive tackles, that you'd still win those games, you would not have believed me. If I told you that one of the prized pickups of the offseason in Jaheim Bell would be kind of a shell of himself halfway through the season because of what is clearly a nagging ankle injury, what it appears to be to me. I don't know what the official diagnosis is. He plays every week. He's got a ton of heart, but he's not the guy that you saw breaking tackles and sprinting to the end zone against LSU at the start of the season. There was another gear to him when this all began that's not been present lately. I commend him for playing like I commend all these guys who find a way to get out there if they can. Maurice Smith is ravaged with energy, injury, and yet he is just continuing to suck it up and find a way to fight through and give you everything he has. And we can go on because at various points this year, whether it's Johnny Wilson missing games, whether it's Keon Coleman fighting through and playing through injury despite not having his top gear as well, whether it be Jordan Travis, who, you know, of course, played hurt earlier this year and is now gone for the season. So many guys that you've watched have to go through this, and they keep winning games. And it's not always pretty, and that's a fair thing to say. Like, I don't get mad when I hear somebody say, well, gosh, they don't look as explosive. They don't look as good as they did earlier in the year. No, they don't. They don't. But you know what they don't do either? They don't lose. They don't lose. They just keep winning. And as evidenced by what was a wild rivalry weekend, it ain't easy to win. I mean, that Auburn team got smoked by more than, 30 by New Mexico State the week before playing Alabama. And they have that game won, if not for a miracle on 4th and goal from the 31 in a game that those poor fans will certainly never forget. Most of us as college football fans won't forget that ending. But Alabama needed that miracle to win a game against that Auburn team, who's been awful. You saw Washington have to fight like hell to survive, kick a last-second field goal against Washington State, a sub-500 Washington State team going into the game. This is the kind of stuff that you, if you're an objective fan, you know can happen on rivalry weekend. It's why we thought going into the game in Gainesville that, man, I think this is going to be a second-half game. I feel like Florida State's going to probably be mired in a bit of a fight here. partly because the injuries have mounted and Florida State hasn't been as good, but largely because obviously Jordan Travis wasn't going to start the game and you didn't know what you were going to get from Tate. I thought Tate would play better than he did. He did not. Survived it, found his composure in key moments, really led a critical drive. That 90-yard drive is the drive. Now all of a sudden, okay, you've got some things that are working. You've discovered you can do this. You can get first downs. You can put together a drive. You can make throws. You can find spots in a defense that has, been apt to give it up. I thought getting to halftime at 12-7 with all the things that had happened to Florida State in the first half on the road in that game, I thought that spelled doom for Florida. I thought they were in trouble. They should have been, and I think they had to have felt this way, up by more, but they weren't. They weren't. And why were they not? Because, again, this Florida State team fights like hell. That is the definition of mental toughness, physical toughness, and being well coached. Mike has instilled in this group a toughness. Again, be it physical or mental or both in this case, that is always on display. There are these moments in games, it's happened a lot this year, in particular down the stretch, where you're watching and you think, they're in a little bit of trouble. They're in a little bit of trouble here. But if you've watched them closely, you've also thought to yourself, just when that voice was telling you, oh man, maybe the dream ends tonight. Maybe the undefeated run is over. Maybe now Florida State finally falls. That other side of you that's watched this toughness on display, that has seen them battle back time and again, that has seen them win games even when they were outplayed. See the Clemson game. That has seen them find a way even when they don't have access to all of their weapons. Even when they're sputtering or struggling on either side of the ball for swaths of game that has you really worried that it's in the balance in the moment. They have always found a way to bounce back and win. And so that halftime moment, Tom, I thought, you know what? Florida's in trouble. They should be up by 2 scores. They've had everything go right that could, including the worst call on a roughing penalty in a year in which I've unfortunately had to document so many in both pro and college football. And yet, Florida State overcame that too. And that was as egregious as it gets. And Jeff Heiser can go to hell. I can't fathom that guy should ever be a part of another game that is officiated involving Florida State. Really, the ACC has to take a look at his incompetence, because I don't think it's vindictive. I just think he's incompetent. There's nobody that watches that play. Nobody on earth. You could see the other officials didn't think it was roughing. They knew it wasn't. You could see they're almost embarrassed. They're a little sheepish. They're like, Jesus, Jeff, what do you think you got there? I mean, that was the look the one official gave him when he came over to consult him. Like, are you sure? Like, what'd you see I didn't see here? None of us saw it, Jeff. That was as egregious as it gets. And Mike rightfully lost his mind, but then gathered himself. As an aside, I will tell you, I don't have it in me. I would have been thrown out of the game. That would have been thrown out of the game. There's that is so bad. It also affects the game. It affects the game. It impacts the game massively in a stretch where you're clawing, you're fighting.
The only touchdown you give up is that one.
Wow.
It's illegitimate. The only touchdown you surrender in the game is illegitimate.
And if you're talking about building to a place where Florida State's at now, where again, you find ways to win games even when things are going poorly. Find ways to win games when your personnel is decimated by injury. You find ways to win games when you don't play well. You find ways to win games on the road in hostile environments. You find ways to win 18 straight games. Well, for a little perspective, we know how difficult it is to build to a place where that is the kind of toughness you have, where that is the kind of skill and talent and hard work and mental toughness and coaching that you have. If you don't believe me, look at the other sideline. As undisciplined as Florida was in critical moments, when you have a player like Jamari Lyons spitting on a player, when you have the interaction that we saw on the sideline with one of their players and a coach, When it begins to fall apart, what do you do to overcome in those moments? Well, Florida State, they win games. That's what they do. They overcome those setbacks and frustrations and emotional outbursts if they have them or whatever it might be. Whereas Florida is now under 2 seasons with Billy Napier, 11-14. They lost 7 games a year ago after the bowl. 6-7 is what they were. They've now lost 7 regular season games, including 5 straight. So they should be used to losing 7 games. In fact, if you go back 3 years, they lost 7 games, but Billy wasn't there for that. So that'd be back-to-back-to-back 7 loss seasons, and yet members of their media are crying on camera